This is an analysis from Alpha Business Media.
So how do you rebuild a nation after a decade of civil war? It's one of the toughest questions out there in geopolitics. How do you really mend a society that's been fractured and find a way to create lasting peace?
Well, for Nepal, which was just coming out of a brutal conflict back in 2006, the answer was something pretty radical: a bold new federal system. The idea was to completely decentralize power. Now, 7 years after it was fully put into practice, we're here to break down how it's actually working out.
All right, so let's start with the blueprint itself. Because to really get what's happening on the ground today, you first have to appreciate just how ambitious this new design for the country was.
And look, this wasn't just about moving some desks around in government offices. No, federalism was the absolute cornerstone of the peace agreement. It was meant to be a whole new social contract, designed to get right at the root causes of the war. We're talking deep, systemic inequality and the social exclusion of entire groups of people.
The whole idea was captured in this really powerful slogan. See, Singh Durbar, that's the central seat of government in Kathmandu. And the promise was to bring Singh Durbar to every village. Basically, to take that concentrated power from the capital and hand it directly over to the people. A fundamental change in how the country was going to be run.
So how did they do it? Well, they designed this three-tiered system. At the top, you've got the main federal government in Kathmandu. Then you have 7 brand new provincial governments. And under them, and this number is just staggering, 753 local governments, each one with its own elected officials.
Now this is where it gets really interesting, how they divided up all the powers. I mean, just look at the local level. They were handed authority over things like their own city police, local taxes, and even basic and secondary education. On paper, this was a level of autonomy that was just completely unprecedented.
But, and this is a huge but, there was a critical flaw in the design, one that analysts flagged pretty early on. The system was built like an hourglass. You've got a strong federal government up top and really powerful local governments down at the bottom. But that middle layer, the provinces, it was squeezed and weak, and it just wasn't able to effectively connect the top and the bottom.
Okay, so despite that big design flaw, the system did actually deliver some remarkable successes, especially when you look at the political side of things. This is really where we see that peace dividend everyone was hoping for.
The biggest win, without a doubt, was bringing back local democracy. Think about it. For almost 20 years, there were no local elections. Then, they were finally held in 2017 and again in 2022. This was huge. It brought back accountability and, for the first time ever, gave those marginalized groups a real, tangible voice in their own government.
And this number right here just says it all. 41%. That's the share of women among elected local representatives, all thanks to new constitutional quotas. I mean, this is a truly groundbreaking achievement for political inclusion. It's a direct fix for one of the deepest, most persistent flaws of the old system.
But for all that incredible political progress, the underlying structure is still very much unfinished. And that has led to some major systemic failures. It really explains why that promise of bringing Singh Durbar to every village, well, it never fully came true.
So what's the core of the problem? It really comes down to money. This chart says it all, doesn't it? The central government in Kathmandu still controls a whopping 92% of all the national revenue. So yeah, they devolved power in name, but they definitely held on to the purse strings.
And what that does is create this classic vicious cycle. The local governments are completely dependent on the central government for money. That means they can't build up their own capabilities, they can't attract talented people, which of course leads to inefficiency and just swings the door wide open for corruption.
Which leads to this really dangerous outcome. Instead of getting rid of corruption, what this flawed system has done in a lot of cases is just decentralize it. It's pushed those same corrupt practices from the capital right down into the local villages and towns.
Okay, so what does all of this actually mean for the average person living in Nepal? Well, the impact on their daily life is, to put it mildly, a mixed bag. You've got some real progress, but also some incredibly frustrating paralysis.
Let's start on a positive note, though. Despite all of these challenges, life expectancy has seen a pretty remarkable jump, from about 65.5 years back in 2015 to 70 years in 2021. That definitely points to some real underlying improvements in living standards, especially in those areas that were recovering from the massive 2015 earthquake.
But when you look at public services where powers are supposed to be shared, the picture gets chaotic, fast. In healthcare, you've got terrible coordination and constant funding delays. and education, it's basically paralyzed by this legal vacuum where nobody is quite sure who's in charge of hiring teachers or even deciding what kids should be learning.
All right, let's switch gears and look at this from a business and investment angle. If you're an investor looking at Nepal, this new federal landscape is, well, it's a complicated mix. You've got some brand new opportunities, but also some pretty significant systemic risks.
On the one hand, the risks are huge. You're looking at tax chaos. We're talking potential double, even triple taxation. Plus a bureaucratic nightmare with over 750 different local regulators. But on the other hand, there are real opportunities. New regional markets are popping up. Provinces are actually starting to compete with each other for investment, and the national laws for foreign investors have gotten better. It's a very high-stakes game, for sure. So where does that leave us? After 7 years, Nepal really is at a crossroads. Let's pull all these different threads together and try to figure out the final verdict and what the path forward might look like.
You know, international partners like the World Bank have laid out a pretty clear roadmap to fix this. It really boils down to 3 critical things. First, reform the money situation to give local governments real financial autonomy. Second, pass the laws to finally make it crystal clear who's in charge of what. And third, invest, and invest heavily in building up the skills and capacity of those local governments.
At the end of the day, the entire future of Nepal's great federal experiment really hangs on this one central question. It's a classic tug of war, the central government's instinct to hold on to control versus the growing demand from local communities for the real autonomy they were promised. The path they choose now is going to define the nation's stability and its prosperity for decades to come.